Conference championships don't matter. Tell Kansas State. Tell the Wildcats. Tell Chris Kleiman and his crew. Will Howard. Deuce Vaughn. Malik Knowles. Those guys are playing lights out here in the first half against TCU. And the Horned Frogs are simply in a ball game that they're typically in just about every week. We saw them blast Iowa State by 48 last week. That's the aberration. Typically, it's TCU football week to week, playing down to the wire. So they're in a typical game. They're comfortable with this. This is how they play against just about everybody in the Big 12. The good teams, the bad teams, the mediocre teams. This is TCU football. Trailing Kansas State 14-10 at half. So it sets up like this. Georgia and Michigan apparently do not have to win. Those conference championships meaningless if you're totally just locked into the playoff. And that's all that matters to you is the playoff. Then the Big Ten and the SEC championship games, even though they will have the highest TV ratings, I can just about guarantee that the SEC and the Big Ten will have the highest TV ratings. They will be the two games that, in a sense, mean the least, excluding the ACC championship game. However, I'm into conference championships. I think in a lot of ways they're more meaningful. They are more tangible than a national championship, which is an invitational. It's not a playoff, it's an invitational. And if I could ever discipline myself to calling it an invitational, because that's what I started to call it in 2014, then that's the term we would stay with. It's an invitational, not a true playoff. Actually, even the new version will be part playoff and part invitational, the 12 team in 2024. But here we are with TCU and Kansas State. And again, TCU got off to a great start with a 92-yard drive. Max Duggan, he will make his bid for the Heisman Trophy. We discussed that earlier on our USC live show, Caleb Williams versus Max Duggan. And Kansas State, they hung in the game. And then they started to take over and started to show their prowess on offense. Will Howard can throw the deep ball. Malik Knowles is a weapon. Deuce Vaughn is one of the better running backs in college football, and certainly fun to watch. Interesting that they split him out wide one time. Deuce Vaughn at 5'6", splits out wide as a wide receiver in the slot. Then he runs the square in. They hit him down to the 2-yard line and convert the touchdown from there. That was after the Malik Knowles jet sweep. So Kansas State shows the full array of offense on a 3-play touchdown drive. Kansas State's defense has come up big with some huge pass breakups downfield, and also a strip on Williams when TCU had completed a long play. There was a blown coverage by Kansas State. TCU completes the long play down the left side of the field, but a strip and a forced fumble recovery by Kansas State averts that drive. So Kansas State up 14-10 as TCU drove it down the field in the final seconds of the first half to get within 4. So we will take your comments and questions, and then I will give you my thoughts on how this all sets up for tonight and tomorrow. Yeah, both should be a good second half. Kansas State, of course, led this matchup in Dallas 28-10 before quarterbacks got injured. And TCU, to their credit, again, made the comeback to win 38-28. Storman's got Ohio State winning the national championship. So, yeah. If TCU wins, then we most likely will have Georgia 1, Michigan 2, TCU 3, Ohio State 4. What could offset that would be possibly if Michigan loses, then TCU would elevate to number 2. If Georgia loses, Michigan elevates to 1. So let's say we've got Georgia upset by LSU. LSU wins the SEC championship. Michigan 1, Georgia 2, TCU 3, Ohio State 4. That's a possibility. Michigan loses the Big Ten championship. Georgia 1, TCU 2, Michigan 3, Ohio State 4. Or we've got both teams losing, which the probability of that happening is about 0. But Michigan and Georgia lose. Does TCU elevate to number 1? All right. Also, what about a one-loss TCU team? If TCU loses this game, TCU versus Alabama, let's have that discussion. TCU versus Alabama. Who has the better resume, the better wins, the better losses? Well, TCU would have this loss, which would be what appears to be a close game against Kansas State at this point, unless they get blown out like USC did in the second half to a 3-loss team. That TCU would have the resume of 12-1, conference championship game loss to Kansas State, a team they earlier defeated, but they lose the rematch and lose it close, versus Alabama having wins over Texas, Mississippi State, Ole Miss. Anyone else on the Alabama slate that is really meaningful? That's pretty much it. It's Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Texas, yes, for Alabama, with the 2 losses on the last play of the game against LSU, Death Valley, 33-32. Last play of the game, field goal, Tennessee, 52-49 on the road in Knoxville. So Alabama with a more impressive wins, losing at the gun, versus what TCU could possibly do here. That remains to be seen. Versus TCU wins, Alabama wins. I believe Alabama's best wins are better than TCU's best wins, the very best. Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Texas. Well, they both defeated Texas. TCU actually had a more impressive showing against Texas than Alabama did. They went to Austin, night game, really controlled the game, led 17-3, won 17-10. Alabama escaped second week of the season in Austin, noon game. TCU's other best wins would be Kansas State, of course. They would also be Oklahoma State. Again, Oklahoma State, Texas. I've got the full rundown. I produced a video where I lined up all the resumes of these teams. Here it is. TCU's best wins: Kansas State, Texas, Texas Tech, and Oklahoma State. Those are all winning teams. Those 4 have winning records: Kansas State, Texas, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State. You've got a 9-3 win, you've got an 8-4 win, and 2 7-5 wins. And of course, Kansas State would be a 10-3 team at that point. For Alabama, they defeated Mississippi State 8-4, Texas 8-4, Ole Miss 8-4. Those are the 3 wins against winning teams, because they lost to Tennessee in the other division. They also defeated Vandy. They are not a winning team. Texas A&M had a losing record. Arkansas 6-6. Auburn with a losing record. So really, TCU's got a larger pool of wins, depth of wins than Alabama, because in addition to those 4 winning records that TCU has defeated, Baylor, Oklahoma, and Kansas. I'm not selling them as great teams, but Baylor, Oklahoma, and Kansas are decent teams with 6-6 records. So TCU actually has better wins than Alabama. Ferris, appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for the contribution. Big Ten versus SEC, bring it. Well, if TCU loses this game, we could have a double portion. I think that's what you're alluding to. Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan, probably Bama. How would we do that? So the committee, I don't believe, wants to have what would set up right now. If TCU loses and Alabama is selected, you would think that Alabama would slot to the 4, bump Ohio State to the 3, and you've got SEC Big Ten. You've got SEC Big Ten semifinal games. And then you've got a possibility, you guarantee that the national championship game is SEC Big Ten. or if you pair them mixed with an SEC against the Big Ten and a Big Ten against an SEC in the semifinals, then you guarantee that we're going to see 2 Big Ten SEC matchups. And then the national championship game could possibly be an all SEC or an all Big Ten, but it has about a 50% chance of being mixed. So the way you guarantee seeing a diversity is doing exactly what Ferris is talking about and matching up the Big Ten and the SEC in the semifinals. Because that way we see 2 Big Ten SEC matchups, and we have a great possibility of seeing 3. Jason says Michigan 1, Georgia 2. I don't know how that's going to happen besides maybe Georgia losing to LSU. Ohio State 3, Bama 4. Let's go. Are you guys rooting for TCU or rooting against TCU? So the consideration there would be, do you want Alabama in the playoff? Or do you want the seedings to possibly change? Reasonable Gump. USC will be punished for playing in their championship game. If they refuse to play it, they would have been in. Utah was not a factor. The final ranking should happen prior to championship week. I get your point. We're comparing teams that have played 13 games versus teams that played 12 games. However, because there is no formula to the schedule, the schedules are not comparable anyway. TCU goes out and schedules Tarleton, SMU, and Colorado in non-conference play. Georgia's got games against Georgia Tech and Oregon. Florida State's got games against Florida and LSU in non-conference play. So we're taking some teams that actually play poor schedules and poor non-conference schedules, and we're giving them an extra game in a championship game. So I get your point, but I believe that that point would be a much more valid point if the schedules were equitable. They're not equitable. USC, of course, cannot refuse to play in a conference championship game. They're contractually obligated to play in the conference championship game. They play in the Pac-12. They are playing in the conference championship game. Were they punished? Well, we've seen this over and over, so this is not a unique situation. This is not a unique situation. We looked at the rankings sometime this week. We looked into the rankings sometime this week, and I tell you, in the future, this is going to be chaotic because, again, you don't have a formal system, which I'm not promoting it to be perfect, but I've at least come up with a system. I've at least devised a system that takes the human element out of it, devised a system for this 12 or 16 team playoff. But if you look at the rankings, the college football playoff rankings right now, and you take this situation forward 2 years, there are 7 teams that are 9-3. How do you differentiate between Florida State, Kansas State, Oregon, UCLA, and some other 9-3 teams for 2 spots? And also a 10-2 Washington team would be left out. So I don't want a committee working on that. I don't want a committee determining that the last 2 spots go to these 2 9-3 teams. And to look at the resumes of those 7 teams, it involves, again, it's North Carolina, Florida State, Oregon, UCLA, Kansas State, and maybe that's all the 9-3 teams. I believe there was 7 of them. And trying to determine which 2 make it and which 5 get left out, it's impossible. I could make an argument in any order for any of those 7 teams to make the playoff. So that's going to be a huge issue going forward, is determining who makes the playoffs. Why leave it up to this committee and their rankings? Go by record, go by head-to-head, go by strength of record. These championship games are going to be worth much more, though, in this new playoff format. We can all agree on that, can't we? The conference championship games, they're all going to mean more. The Kansas State game right now, and I love the conference championships. I think they're more valid than the national championship. It's tangible. You play in a conference, you play everybody, you play a conference championship game, you win it, as opposed to people deciding who plays in a playoff. Yeah, this group of 5 situation, that's intriguing as well. Tulane is simply playing for a Cotton Bowl right now, but in 2 years, they'll be playing for a college football playoff appearance. And that's another committee decision to decide the top group of 5. So they have that power. The committee's power currently is simply selecting the 4 teams. So they have all the power, all the authority in selecting the 4 teams. In the new playoff format, if you can't make the top 12 in the country, then yes, there's going to be an argument over 11, 12, 10, 11, 12 versus 13, 14, and 15. As I just pointed out this year, you've got a glut of 9 and 3 teams, and there's going to be an argument. But really, if you can't make it, if you can't be better than 9 and 3, you really have no gripe. You do have a gripe versus the other 9 and 3 teams that are going to make it, but you had ample opportunity not to lose 3 games and make the playoff. Really, the committee's power, their authority, is transitioning from simply selecting the 4 teams to then their big power going forward is going to be the buys. Them having the power to determine who gets buys and who does not. And then, of course, them trying to determine out of this glut of teams that are going to be 9 and 3, who makes it and who doesn't make it. And then the other point in all of this, consider, let's fast forward again 2 years to 2024 and use the current situation. Right now, Kansas State's number 10 in the country. They're 9 and 3. They would make the playoff by 1 spot because remember that number 12 position is going to go to the group of 5. So, for example, this year, Washington right now is 10 and 2, and they are number 12 in the country. However, they would not make the playoff because the group of 5 team, Tulane or UCF, is going to take that spot. So the number 12 team in the country, most of the time, is gone and replaced by a group of 5. Well, think of this situation. What do you do with this? Kansas State right now, 9 and 3, number 10 in the country, in the playoff. However, we'll play off a reasonable Gump's comment there. They're being forced to play in a conference championship game. And if they lose, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? Do you say, well, they dropped to 9 and 4, so all these other 9 and 3 teams are ahead of them. We're going to drop them, and they drop out of the playoffs. Or they were 9 and 3. They played the number 3 team in the country, an undefeated team, and let's say they lost. It's 14-10 right now. They lose 24-20. They're 9 and 4. Their record's not as good as these other teams, but they had to play in a conference championship game. They're going to stay in the top 10 or 11 to be included in the playoff. You see the issue there? And when this playoff format was announced, I went through the last 10 years, And you continually see that issue coming up where a team would have made the playoffs prior to the conference championship games. Let's say they're number 10 in the country. They lose a conference championship game. They drop back to number 15. They miss the playoffs. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? All right. Second half kickoff. Does TCU come back and make the college football playoff? Do they lose and lose close and still have an argument to make the playoff? Or does Kansas State blow them out? I doubt that. I would guess that this is going to be a typical TCU game down to the wire. All right. We appreciate everybody being here. We will have content coming your way throughout the day, and especially after the Big Ten and ACC championship games tonight. We'll be live taking your calls at approximately 11:30 Eastern. Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Enjoy the second half.